Hello, my name's Gavin, and this is Genre Books, and June on the Range is now here. This is the BookTube reading event created by Michael K. Vaughan, where we read westerns all month. As I've done a couple of lists recently in choosing 50 horror books on Gutenberg and 50 fantasy books again on Project Gutenberg, I thought I'd keep the ball rolling and see if I can come up with 50 westerns. I sort of have. I say sort of because I will be stretching the definition of western, although not to breaking point, I hope. There are a number of books here which actually detail the western prairie frontier experience in Canada. So not exactly the Old West, but the Northwest. But I think there are some good books here, and I make no apologies for including these. If you want someone to apologise to you, find a Canadian. I have split the list somewhat, though one part of the list takes the vast bulk, which is westerns, classics westerns, but there's also a little section on dime novels, a few western books for children, and inevitably some pulp western writers. I am going to start with the dime novels, and I'll start with them because they were written very early on, I'd say from sort of the 1860s onwards, at which point the traditional Wild West time is still happening. Therefore, some of these novels don't deal with white hat, black hat cowboys. It will be more of frontier activity. There's actually more books where the protagonist is a Native American themselves. Whilst I've chosen just one book per author here, if you were to look it up on Project Gutenberg, you will find the majority of these authors have multiple titles against their name. Not all of them are always westerns, but if you throw a dart at, well, don't throw darts at your screen, but if you were to throw a dart at your screen, you will most likely hit a western work. So let's start with Edward Sylvester Ellis, who wrote some of the more famous dime novels, and for him I have chosen a book, Seth Jones or The Captives of the Frontier. Ned Buntline, his name wasn't really Ned Buntline, is a writer who, amongst his other achievements, does claim to have coined the nickname Buffalo Bill for Bill Cody. Bill Cody. The book I have chosen for him is Wild Bill's Last Trail. Anne S. Stevens is the first female writer on this list, and there are more female writers of westerns than I think is the popular understanding. But in the world of dime novels, whether the writer is a male or female didn't really seem to matter. So Anne S. Stevens wrote a number of dime novels. One of the ones that has a certain western feel is Malaeska, or The Indian Wife of the White Hunter. Edward Willet is the next author, and I have chosen Silverspur or The Mountain Heroine. I'm not giving you two book titles there. Dime novels have very long titles. It's unusual if a book title doesn't have at least a comma and a semicolon employed. Some of these I won't be giving the full title of the book, but you'll be able to find it. And three where I don't give you the full title include Frederic Whittaker and Ruby Roland, George L. Aiken, The Antelope Boy, and Henry M. Avery, Old Bear Paw. And the final traditional dime novel I'm going to give you is by Jos E. Badger, and that is Delaware Tom or The Traitorous Guide. Traitor Guide? The Traitor Guide. So we move into the bulk of the list, which is started off in a particular order. That plan fell apart. But I do begin with two of the big names. The Virginian by Owen Wister is, I think, the earliest traditional Western that I can find on Project Gutenberg. Zane Grey is well represented on Project Gutenberg. I think there are about 50 works by him up there. I've actually chosen the one that I'll be reading this June on the range, and that is Riders of the Purple Sage. I've put Jack London on this list, and probably not exactly Western, but certainly from the ones I remember reading as a child, it had that frontier sensibility, so I will make a few apologies for including him here, and I'm going to have Call of the Wild on this list. Two more lady writers now. O Pioneers by Willa Cather and B.M. Bauer, Chip of the Flying U. B.M. Bauer has sold nearly 2 million books during her lifetime, but she was markedly more successful than her husband, or her second husband, Bertrand W. Sinclair, who is also on this list with his book Raw Gold. The next book is The Trail Book by Mary Austin, who is a writer who I believe also wrote quite a lot of non-fiction about the West and the frontier. Luke Allan is an author who wrote a number of novels in a series about a character, Blue Pete. Now, there is only one Blue Pete novel on Project Gutenberg, so I have chosen another of his books which is on there, which is The Lone Trail. Harold Bindloss was a Scottish writer, and there are a few British, English, Scottish writers that make their way over, either writing about the West or moving to the West. In Bindloss's case, the Pacific Northwest. He moves to Canada, writes a number of books, some about Africa, which are not generally well regarded, but some about the Pacific Northwest, which generally are. And he must have made an impression because they named a town after him up there in Canada. The book I've chosen is Winston of the Prairie. One book that certainly isn't set in Canada is Wyoming by William MacLeod Raine. The Log of a Cowboy by Andy Adams is a fictionalized account of his own experience in driving thousands of head of cattle across America. Gustave Aimard is someone who you may have guessed from the name isn't Scottish, but is French. I believe he was the son of a Napoleonic general. He's very well represented on Project Gutenberg, and whilst a number of his books are not westerns by any stretch of the imagination, there are enough there with a frontier bent, and I have chosen the book The Border Rifles, A Tale of the Texan War. Bransford of Rainbow Ridge is a book by Eugene Manlove Rhodes, who is another author with plenty of works available. Will Lillybridge, a name which dares you to say it 10 times quickly, is the author of Ben Blair, Story of a Plainsman. James B. Hendricks is another writer with plenty of works available on Project Gutenberg. He's not that Jimi Hendrix, he's this other Jimi Hendrix, and the book I've chosen by him is Prairie Flowers. The next book is The Westerners by Stuart Edward White, and the book I've chosen by Hamlin Garland is one of a number of collections of frontier stories rather than a novel in and of itself, and that is Main Travelled Roads. Another collection of short stories is Bret Harte's The Luck of Roaring Camp and Other Tales. And the final short story collection, I believe, for the moment, is Josephine Clifford's Overland Tales. Robert J.C. Stead wrote The Homesteaders, and for Emerson Hough, I've chosen Prairie Gold. Caroline Lockhart was a failed actress in silent cinema, turned her hand to journalism, and then on to writing novels. She found much success in the Western genre, and the book I've chosen to represent her work is The Man from Bitter Roots, which was made into a film in 1916, a silent movie, and then again 60 years later in 1976. Grace Livingston Hill was an author who always wrote from a Christian perspective. Either the characters are already Christian or they become Christian during the course of the novel. There are, however, some Western-based books in her body of work, and I've chosen one called A Voice in the Wilderness, which is the first of a duology. The Girl of the Golden West is a book by David Belasco, not normally known as an author, but it's a Western, so included here. The Long Dim Trail is a book by Forestine C. Hooker. Now this is an adult book, but if you look up her other works on Gutenberg, be wary, she also wrote quite a lot of juvenile fiction. To rattle off a few, purely because I don't know much about the writers, The Bond Boy by George W. Ogden, The Texican by Dane Coolidge, The Watchers of the Plains by Ridgewell Cullum, The Heart of the Desert by Honoré Morrow, and The Sunset Trail by Alfred Henry Lewis. The writer Andre Norton is known primarily for science fiction and fantasy, but she also wrote some Western novels. I think they may be aimed at the younger end of the market, but I'll give you the names of two of them here because I don't know which one is the first. I believe they're about the same character, and those two books are Ride Rebel Ride and Rebel Spurs. The next section of the list are books which are unambiguously aimed at the juvenile fiction market, as it was once called before everyone started referring to YA. James Cody Ferris is not an author so much as a pseudonym with a number of different authors filling in. There are some of these on Project Gutenberg. These are the X novels, and I have chosen X Boys at Nugget Camp. Warren H. Miller wrote a book called Red Mesa. Will James had a juvenile fiction book called Smokey the Cowhorse. C.F. Argyll Saxby wrote The Fiery Totem, and we are lucky enough to have a Fran Stryker book on Gutenberg. There is just the one, but it is The Lone Ranger Rides. Fran Stryker created The Lone Ranger. He also created The Green Hornet, but there is no way I'm finding 50 superhero books on Project Gutenberg. But the Lone Ranger must be one of the all-time most popular Western heroes in radio, film, TV and book. But to finish off, it's pulp writers. And it had to be pulp writers. So I've not named individual stories here. Most of these writers have a welter of stories available on Project Gutenberg. Dig in, some of these are great. Roy Norton, H. Bedford Jones, W. C. Tuttle, Clarence E. Mulford, Johnston McCulley, Jackson Gregory, and Max Brand. That's your 50. So do give June on the Range a try. Here's your excuse to dip your toe in the western waters without having to shell out to buy a book. It has been pointed out to me that it would be helpful to put a link into Project Gutenberg, which I will do so in the description below, and I will try to put in links to the authors and where to find them on Gutenberg. Anyway, if you've got this far, thank you for just allowing me to read a list of books out to you. Until next time,